Okay, well, look, I think the first thing to think about if one is going to go into consultancy is actually do I know what I'm letting myself in for? What are the downsides of being a consultant? And I've just got a little slide back here that I'll show you. This slide, and I hope you can see it okay, indicates the average hours worked by consultants, and you can see some firms down there named, and the average travel percentage that the consultants say that they're doing. So on the left-hand side of the slide, for comparison purposes, we've got a couple of investment banks, Goldman's and JP Morgan. And we all know investment bankers work long hours, as you can see by the black bars there. But the consultants aren't that far behind them. But if we look at the amount of travel that investment bankers do, it's not that high in comparison with the consultancy firms. So these are the two big drawbacks, the time away from home and the long hours. And you need to say to yourself, am I prepared to do that at this stage in my life? Think about what the implications are for your family life, your outside interests, the other things that you do outside the normal 9 to 5, because this is not normal 9 to 5. And you need to be prepared to commit to spending maybe up to 70% of your year away from home, and maybe working 60, 70 hours a week, perhaps working occasionally at weekends too. So that is probably the biggest reason why people come out of consultancy, and why I said at the beginning of the presentation, I would often get calls from people asking me to help them get out of consultancy. It's precisely for these reasons. I would say most consultants last about 3 to 5 years before they go and get themselves a proper job outside the consulting industry. And what that proper job might be, well, I would suggest that if you are seriously thinking about consultancy, think now about what your exit strategy is going to be. Where are you going to be in the longer term? And if I can just pose that question on a slide here, where are you going to be in maybe 10 years or 20 years, where you should be at your peak earning years? So let's say, for example, you have decided that in 20 years' time, you are going to be running a pharmaceuticals company. Well, I would suggest to you, you should look at consultancy firms who would expose you to what's going on in the consulting industry, is what's going on in the pharmaceutical industry, rather. They might be specialists in pharmaceuticals, or you may join a unit within a consultancy firm that specializes in pharmaceuticals or life sciences or so forth. So whilst you're in that firm for 3 to 5 years, you'll get exposed to probably all the problems that are going on in pharmaceuticals, trademarking, supply chain, whatever. And you'll get to meet many of the important people in the pharmaceutical industry. And then when you decide to leave consultancy, you can tap people on the shoulder and say, could I move across? Because I've got deep, deep industry knowledge of pharmaceuticals. On the other hand, you might not have a plan yet as to where you're going to be in 10 or 20 years' time, and that's fine, because in my experience, a lot of people haven't actually got that far ahead worked out. So you could join a consultancy and get exposed to a wide variety of different functions and different market sectors, as I said earlier, and then maybe choose one of those to launch into once you leave consultancy. So where could you go if you left consultancy, and what sort of role would you carry out? Well, some consultants go into internal consultancy units in large companies. So many FTSE 100 or Fortune 500 companies, banks and insurance companies and so forth have internal consultancy teams. They're there to partly to reduce the cost of bringing in external consultants, but they're also there to provide the future leaders of the organization. And many people who go into internal consultancy units will probably be moved on within 18 months, 2 years, into middle ranking or senior roles in corporate headquarters, maybe corporate planning or corporate strategy, or maybe as a divisional director of a smaller part of the larger organization. And of course, it's also possible for you to hang out your own shingle and practice as a consultant yourself. I would certainly recommend spending a good few years being trained as a consultant in a consultancy firm before you decide to launch off on your own. But I've met many people over the years who, having had some experience with one of the large consultancies, or indeed a smaller specialist one, have then launched themselves out as an independent and had many lucrative and happy years working as a specialist in a narrow area. So I think that's the great thing about consultancy, that it doesn't necessarily require you to have thought out your longer term career plan yet, but you can also use all the knowledge that you will have gained before you go to business school and whilst you're doing your MBA to formalize and create an opportunity for yourself further down the line. And that opportunity could also be, as some consultants move, they go into the private equity or the venture capital side. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen increasingly consultants going to set up their own businesses, armed with the knowledge that they've gained of a particular function or a particular industry whilst they were consultants. So that's the great thing about consultancy. You just get to be able to choose a wide variety of opportunities when it comes to the end of your time in consultancy.